Hey, Dr. Shannon Pierce here, and I want to go over with you guys today as part of our autoimmune series, probably the most popular autoimmune issue, specifically that I help people work through, and that's Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So today what I want to really teach you guys is the difference between hypothyroid and Hashimoto's. And then if you do have Hashimoto's, which is the autoimmune issue that comes along with thyroid, where to start looking for your answers and what your next steps would look like. So I'm going to take you through all of that. So if you have hypothyroid or you have Hashimoto's, this is the perfect place for you to start kind of figuring some of that stuff out. So let's start first with hypothyroid. So your traditional hypothyroid means that your thyroid is not producing enough thyroid hormone. Now, most people, when I meet them, are diagnosed with hypothyroid, and maybe you're on medication, maybe you're not, but typically once they find out that you have a lower functioning thyroid, which nowadays is typically only a TSH test, maybe a T4, which on a different video we'll get into why that is totally flawed. But let's say you go to your doctor and they test your TSH and maybe your T4, and it comes back that your TSH is elevated, which means a higher TSH is a lower functioning thyroid. So your TSH is high, and maybe they even see that your T4, which is one of your thyroid hormones, is a little bit low. The doctor's gonna say, yeah, you have hypothyroid. Here's your medication, Synthroid, levothyroxine, Armour, Nature. It doesn't matter what the medication is. That's going to be their answer for a low functioning thyroid. Now, unfortunately, what happens is typically that's where the investigation stops. So the very first thing I want you guys to think is if you have hypothyroid and especially if you're on a thyroid medication, and you've never been tested for Hashimoto's, which is the antibodies to your thyroid, that is step number one. Because the research shows that 80% of hypothyroid is actually caused by Hashimoto's. 80%. It is the number one cause of low functioning thyroid. But most people don't even know that's what they have, and it becomes very important because the way you're going to address just a low functioning thyroid versus how you're going to address an autoimmune thyroid needs to be completely different. So step number one, if you have hypothyroid or you're on a thyroid medication and they've never tested your thyroid antibodies to see if it's Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, but today I'm specifically going to talk about Hashimoto's, then that's step number one. Step number two, let's say you're the person who has already done that. You've been diagnosed with Hashimoto's. So you've gone to your doctor, they tested your thyroid hormones, and they tested your antibodies, and either your TPO, which is your thyroid peroxidase antibodies, or your anti-thyroglobulin antibodies. There are two different types of antibodies that could be associated with Hashimoto's. So if either one of those, or both for most of you, come back positive, the doctor's gonna say, yep, you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is the autoimmune version of typically hypothyroid. Now, medically, on that side of things, where a lot of my clients get really, really frustrated, is you get diagnosed with Hashimoto's, but what's the answer from that point forward? What's the new plan of treatment after you find out that you have autoimmune thyroid different than what they would have done if you just had hypothyroid? Put that in the comments. If you have been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, what did your medical doctor do differently for you once they found out that it was an autoimmune issue? I'm opening this up so I can see comments. If you have comments, go ahead and put them in there so I can answer your questions. So for most of you, the answer is absolutely nothing different. Whether you had hypothyroid or Hashimoto's, you're getting the same standard course of treatment, which is a thyroid medication for life, right? So if that's you and you already know you have Hashimoto's, your next question is to figure out what caused your Hashimoto's. Because for me, when I'm looking at these two cases, as soon as we know that this is an autoimmune issue in the thyroid, it completely changes the way that we are going to address this. You no longer have a primary thyroid issue. This is an immune system issue. This is an autoimmune issue, which means we need to figure out what's triggering that response in your body and remove those triggers so that your body can balance and heal. So today I'm going to teach you the most common causes of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So if you have that autoimmune issue and you don't know why or what caused it, then you still have a lot of answers to figure out. So that's what I'm going to share with you guys today. So I'm going to pull up a couple of screens as we go. The first one, let's talk about, let me make that a little bit bigger if you guys can see it. So the number one cause of Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune thyroid, is a chronic Epstein-Barr infection. So you guys may have heard this before. See all these comments, nothing, didn't change anything. It's pretty typical. So the number one cause of Hashimoto's is Epstein-Barr virus. Now, again, there's going to be a lot of just disconnect between what your traditional kind of mainstream medicine will say about Epstein-Barr and what I believe, what we've researched and what we know to be true. Because you can go to your doctor and they'll either ask you, well, did you have mono in the past? And if you say no, then they write it off. Or they'll say, yeah, if we test this, it's just going to show that you had an infection in the past. This can't be what's currently causing your issues. And that is just absolutely not true. So Epstein-Barr is the virus that in its acute form does cause mono. So you get this for the first time and typically you have symptoms of mono. Now, even if you don't know you've ever had mono, I'm going to cover that in just a second, that does not mean you don't have a chronic Epstein-Barr infection. I had never been diagnosed with mono that I knew of, and this was a big trigger for my hormone and my thyroid issues. So Epstein-Barr typically causes mono. But what happens, especially in women, this is why we see Hashimoto's and thyroid issues so much more prominent in women, is because these viruses, let's say you had mono when you were 11, right? You had the infection, you felt kind of crappy, you got over it, and then we get to our early 20s. We're going to school, we're having kids, we're busy, we're stressed. The mechanism of these viruses are to reactivate when you are at a weak point in your life, which can be anything from stress, busyness, hormone imbalances, pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, loss, grief, death, accidents. This is why so many people, if you have an autoimmune issue, I bet you half of you watching got diagnosed after some type of pretty large life event, which could include childbirth. We have huge swings in our immune system and in our hormones, which can reactivate these chronic infections, but nobody tests for them. And then by nature, what a virus does is it gets inside your cells, your tissue, your DNA. So picture this, if you have antibodies to your thyroid, the medical community will say that that autoimmune issue is your body attacking your thyroid for no reason, right? That's what it is. Miscommunication, your immune system's attacking itself. We don't know what causes this. It's just a phenomenon. Let's put you on medication for life. No, totally wrong. Your body is fighting something. So thyroid in particular is actually the place in your body that has the most blood flow than any other gland or tissue. So all the blood flow gets up to the thyroid. So these viruses, when they reactivate, they get in your bloodstream. They circulate around your body. Most of your blood flow goes to your thyroid. These viruses love warm, squishy tissue to make a house in. So they get in your thyroid, and then your immune system says, oh my gosh, there's a virus in here, we should attack it. So it starts making antibodies towards Epstein-Barr, not towards your own thyroid. This is where we are totally missing the mark when it comes to autoimmune issues. Your body's not attacking itself, your body's attacking something. And our job as your holistic doctors are to figure out what that something is. And it's different for everybody, but the number one cause is Epstein-Barr. So if you have Hashimoto's and you don't know why, your very next step is to test for Epstein-Barr and to see if that's the cause of what's going on. Let me show you another statistic. I love statistics. So this one might be a little bit small for you to see, so I'll read it for you. This is from a gynecological endocrinology textbook. This is medicine, guys. This is not even my words. This is the source. This is your traditional mainstream medicine. That says Epstein-Barr infections do affect quite a lot of people, but in the acute infection, it results in a latent infection. And in these latent infections, it has been associated with lymphomas and cancer, so major immune system issues. But there's also a hypothesis, even in medicine, that says a past Epstein-Barr infection can also lead to allergic and autoimmune diseases. Guys, they know this. I just don't understand why they're not testing it. So even if you don't have acute mono and your doctor says, oh, that means you've had an infection in the past, bring up this study and say, yeah, and you guys are telling us in these textbooks that a past infection can create an autoimmune disease. Why are we not dealing with these things? So if you are frustrated with the Hashimoto's diagnosis, please, please, please investigate Epstein-Barr, and do not let a doctor tell you that a past infection just means you had it before and that it's not currently aggravating your immune system. Epstein-Barr, number one. One more piece of information about Epstein-Barr. This is amazing. So in a Polish study, they actually, and this also includes Graves' disease, they did a study that shows that if they were to take out the thyroid tissue of somebody with Hashimoto's or Graves' disease and compare it to somebody who does not have an autoimmune thyroid, it says thyroid cells in 80% of people with Hashimoto's, that's a giant number. 80% of people with Hashimoto's, they found DNA for Epstein-Barr on their thyroid, and 62.5% of people with Graves' disease, compared to 0 with the control of somebody who doesn't have autoimmune thyroid. I mean, come on, people, these are staggering numbers, yet we're still not addressing this as a cause of autoimmune thyroid. Like, these are crazy numbers. And again, these are medical studies. So Epstein-Barr is huge. We're all about finding your why. If you've got diagnosed with something and you have a disease or a condition, your next answer or your next question you ask has to be why. And you have to find somebody to help you with this, because unfortunately, you're probably just not getting those answers from traditional medicine, and that's very, very frustrating. So Epstein-Barr, if you don't know if that's a root cause or not, whether you know you've had strep or whether you know you've had mono in the past or not. And let me explain to you why. So the kind of sequence of events that I always follow through with someone with Hashimoto's is, okay, you have hypothyroid. Do you know you have Hashimoto's? If you know you have Hashimoto's, do we have an active or a latent Epstein-Barr infection? And if that's positive, my next question is always, do you have, in particular, a strep bacteria or infection in your gut? And the reason I ask that is because strep bacteria and other kinds of bacteria as well, it's not just strep, but typically strep bacteria and Epstein-Barr co-infect in a very large number of cases. So here's what normally happens is, as a kid, maybe you had a lot of strep throat, right? You go to the doctor, you're not feeling good, so they swab you, because that's the easiest test, right? They didn't have to take blood, they just do a quick swab, they send it off, and it comes back positive for strep. So they say, oh yeah, you have strep, here's your antibiotics, go home and rest, it's gonna take a couple of weeks to get better. So you go home, you feel crappy, you have the swollen lymph nodes, you have the sore throat, all classic of strep, but also classic of mono. But they don't test for mono because Epstein-Barr is a blood draw and it's a more complicated lab. And as soon as they get a positive strep, oh, there's your answer, and they stop looking. So most of you probably have had mono and you just don't know because you got diagnosed with strep and then treated for that and just felt crappy and thought that's what it was. So especially if you've had reoccurring strep infections, strep throat, strep bacterial, even strep, group B strep in the vaginal canal, if you've had reoccurring strep infections anytime in your life, Epstein-Barr is probably coming right along with that. So follow me back through the sequence of events just to sum this up for you guys. I'm read a couple questions first. Very interesting. Nothing's changed. Yes. Adrenals. Yep. So we'll talk more about that as we go. Right now we're just talking the very specific causes, and then we'll talk about processes on what needs to be fixed if you do have those issues. And adrenals, oh my goodness. If you have a thyroid issue and someone's not helping you properly address your adrenal function, you're missing a giant piece of that puzzle. So let's bring it back together. For Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is autoimmune thyroid, hypothyroid, the number one cause of hypothyroid is Hashimoto's, which is the autoimmune piece. The number one cause of Hashimoto's is Epstein-Barr virus. And an Epstein-Barr virus almost always will co-infect with a strep bacteria or another type of chronic bacterial overgrowth or infection in the gut. So if you haven't looked at your Epstein-Barr titers, if you don't know what those values look like, and if you haven't checked for overgrowth with bacteria and infections in your gut, those are going to be the first places you want to start diving really deep into to figure out why you have Hashimoto's. Because once you figure out your why, you can make much more intentional decisions specific to you and not someone else's protocol, not the general thing that somebody's telling you about Hashimoto's, but why is your immune system going like that, and what is it attacking inside the thyroid? And that's how you really find some true answers. So if you have Hashimoto's, I hope that was good information for you. I hope you learned something and get to investigating. You just have to find some new answers.